What is exposure to air pollution? Why is it important, and what can you do about it? Exposure is what you actually breathe at your nose. Exposure is important because the air pollution you actually breathe is what can harm you personally. There are many different pollutants we're concerned about, but some of the most important ones are nitrogen dioxide, or NO2, ozone, O3, carbon monoxide, CO, and fine particulate matter, which is PM2.5. NO2 and ozone affect the upper respiratory system and exacerbate asthma for those who have asthma. Carbon monoxide affects the central nervous system and causes nausea and dizziness. And fine particulate matter can penetrate deep into the lung and into the bloodstream and cause both respiratory and cardiovascular illness and even premature death. Air pollution concentrations are measured at fixed site air quality monitors. Hong Kong has an excellent air quality monitoring network with monitors located throughout the territories and the region, including general monitors on rooftops, background monitors at places where we can quantify the upwind air pollution from other places, and monitors at roadside, such as at Causeway Bay, Mongkok, and Central. These measurements are very important in that they enable consistent tracking of air pollution trends over time and between specific locations. This graph, for example, is illustrating trends in air pollution for fine particles at rural stations, roadside stations, in new towns, and in urban areas, and showing that these trends change with time and also are different at different locations. These monitors are very accurate, but they're also very large, and we can't place them everywhere where we spend our time. So it's not feasible to install these monitors everywhere that we breathe, including in our homes. Thus, we don't really know very well how much air pollution people are actually breathing. However, new portable air quality sensors, such as the one shown here that looks like a carry-on bag, now enable us to measure air quality almost everywhere we live or go. So this enables us to collect data to understand and answer the question, what can you do about exposure? First, we need to know where exposures are actually occurring and what factors affect these exposures, and then we can develop accurate information to help figure out how to reduce exposures. So for example, exposure in a flat is very dependent on whether windows are opened or closed and depending on the season. In the wintertime in Hong Kong, during high air pollution episodes, it's very common to have windows open. But unfortunately, the open windows let air get into the indoor environment, and that brings outdoor pollution inside. Ideally, it might be better not to let the outdoor air pollution inside. But first, we need to understand that that's how the air pollution gets into the indoors and how it affects you personally. We can use the portable monitor to measure exposures in any part of the flat, including the living room or the kitchen. And we can look at how air pollution from outside gets into different rooms of the flat, and even how indoor air pollution in the flat is also affected by indoor sources such as cooking. We can take the portable instrument onto a minibus, as I'm doing in this picture, and we can collect data on air pollution concentrations that people are breathing at nose level within the minibus. We can also do the same measurements in a double-decker bus. In the bottom deck, the top deck, we can figure out where exposures might be lower in different parts of the bus. And of course, we can conduct measurements at the bus stop, which we think probably will have higher exposure than in the bus because it's outdoors and it's near traffic. We also can conduct measurements in the bus terminal. And the exposures in the bus stop and the bus terminal do tend to be higher than in the bus. And one thing you can do personally is reduce your wait time at the bus stop and the bus terminal to reduce your exposure. And there's a number of apps available to help you know when buses are going to arrive, so you can time your visit to the bus stop to reduce your wait time. That will help reduce your exposure. We've also done measurements in the MTR system, including the platforms and the trains themselves. And these stations are air conditioned and have very low levels of fine particulate matter. So this is very good. This is a very clean environment for transport. The air quality on the trains themselves is generally also very good because of the use of air conditioning on the train. We can also take the portable monitor to Nathan Road. We can measure actual exposures as pedestrians on roadside or when crossing busy streets. We can measure exposure concentrations on the many footbridges throughout Hong Kong, many of which are located over busy roads. And we can measure in many institutional environments such as shopping malls or office buildings. Our team has measured air pollutant exposure concentrations in homes, offices, schools, shopping malls, minibuses, double-deck buses, MTR stations, MTR trains, and many other places. Measured exposure concentrations typically differ from air quality measurements. For example, the MTR system generally has very low fine particle concentrations compared to outdoors. However, it turns out, though, that there is some variation in PM concentration within the train. If you stand near the door, you get about a 15% higher exposure than if you're in the middle of the cabin. So this is information you can use to make your own choices about how to reduce your exposure. Double-deck buses also have relatively low fine particle concentrations, but bus terminals and bus stops have relatively high concentrations. Exposure concentrations in schools are typically much lower in the summer when air conditioning is used and windows are closed, but nearly the same as outdoors in winter when many classroom windows are open. So this may have implications for potential changes to ventilation practices in schools, especially during episodes in the winter with high air pollution. Exposure concentrations in offices and malls are often lower than outdoors because these types of buildings have central air conditioning with filtering systems, but the actual PM levels in the building depend on the type of filters used and also depend on whether, for example, in a mall, there's cooking occurring. There are many ways to reduce exposure in the short and long term, but in order to identify ways to reduce exposure, we first have to understand how to quantify exposures and to prioritize what actions would be effective at reducing personal exposures. To find out more, visit our website for the Personalized Real-Time Air Quality Informatics System for Exposure, or PRAISE.